Someone once said that demography is destiny. Well, is it? In the April 21st edition of The Economist, we're going to be asking that question specifically in relation to China. I'm Rob Gifford, the China editor of The Economist, and with me here is the globalization editor of The Economist, John Parker, who has written the article. John, tell me, why is demography so important in relation to China?
China has this great story of sort of, unstoppable success. Economically, it's going to overtake America, within about 5 years. Militarily, it's, building up this giant army and weapons everywhere. It's already, uses more steel. It exports more than America. Everywhere you look, it's sort of rivaling America or will soon overtake it. But there's just this one sort of feature of Chinese life, which is genuinely very, very problematic. And that's sort of it's the structure of the population. The problem that China has got as a result of sort of trying to slam the brakes on its population growth so quickly, which it did about 20 years ago when it introduced the one-child policy. Population was slowing down then. It introduced this one-child policy, which really restrained population growth and family size even more, sort of unnaturally. And that sort of sent waves through the system.
Just talk us through some of those implications and how this demographic situation is going to play out over the coming decades.
The classic sort of first concept that you want to grasp in demography is the fertility rate. Basically the number of children an average woman can expect to have during her lifetime. And in America it's 2, and that's the size, that's the number which basically keeps the population stable. China's fertility rate is about 1.5, with 1.5 children per family. And in some parts of China it's 2, but in some parts of China you get spectacularly low fertility rates. In Shanghai, for example, the fertility rate is below 1. That's less than 1 child per family. And if you imagine what that does to a population, you have, in one generation, you've obviously got the 2 parents. In the next generation, only 1. I mean, if everyone, literally everyone in a whole country, had just 1 child, the population would halve in a generation. So you can see that while the difference between a fertility rate of 2 and a fertility rate of 1.5 doesn't sound all that much, like half a child, actually that is a very, very big difference. So that while America's population over the next 40 years will rise, as I said, because of immigration, because of sort of inertia in the system, momentum will carry it forward to an increase of about 20%, and will keep the balance between the generations fairly stable. In China, the population will begin to fall after about 2025, and the balance between the generation really becomes very, very screwy.
And what implications does this have, for instance, for China's workforce in the next couple of decades?
Okay, my favourite example of this looks at the age group just joining the workforce, the sort of early 20-year-olds, 20 to 25, the best educated, the most active, traditionally sort of economically active group. So in America, basically over the next 40 years, that group is fairly stable. It falls a little tiny bit, not very much. In China now, that group, there's about 120 million people in that group. In 2040, there'll be 60 million people in that group. So the number will halve. And that's astounding fall, absolutely astounding fall in such a short time. And so that would have very, very big economic consequences, it seems to me. I mean, it would be likely to, as I said, this is the best educated, one would assume. These are the most likely to have just been to university. They're the most energetic, and yet suddenly, this group which would introduce new ideas, new activities, well, there's half the number there used to be.
We'll just talk about some of the other social and indeed financial implications. They must be profound, the implications for the broader Chinese society.
Yeah, well, the Chinese talk about a 4-to-1 society. It's like an upside-down pyramid. So 4 grandparents, produce 2 parents, produce 1 child. And if you think that, the working population tends to support the older population above it, and then especially the grandparents, the retired population, the group just coming in, i.e. 1, is supporting 4 grandparents. That's an enormous burden. Now, obviously it's not literally the case that there'll be 4 grandparents, retired grandparents, for every 1 working person. But the so-called dependency ratio is very high in China, much higher than in America, much higher than in any comparable country. When I say comparable, I mean middle-income country, say Brazil or India. And so this sort of the problem of having enough people to work to support those who don't work anymore is very, very burdensome.
So, looking to the future, what can China do? What should it do? And indeed, what is it doing to try and address these issues that you've written about?
I personally think it actually needs to campaign for larger families. It needs to make life much easier for mothers. Essentially, the burden in China of bringing up the children falls on the mother. And it just needs to do all these things because at the moment it's in danger of falling into a sort of low fertility trap. Everyone expects to have 1 child, so they only have 1 child, and the process just repeats through the generations. It needs to break out of that trap. It's not going to suddenly break free. It's not suddenly going to become a kind of middle fertility country overnight. But I do think it needs to be aware of the dangers to just repeating this low fertility for many, many years.
John Parker, Globalization Editor of The Economist, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.